In this video, we're going to look at what we mean by the term adverbial clause. An adverbial clause is a group of words that functions as an adverb and contains a subject and a verb. Let's quickly remind ourselves what an adverb is. An adverb is a word that can modify a verb. It describes the verb by telling us how, when, where, or why. Let's look at some normal adverbs to start with. He walks quickly. In this sentence, quickly is our adverb. It modifies the verb walks and tells us how. Tony ran yesterday. Yesterday is the adverb. It modifies the verb ran and it tells us when. Sally lives there. There is the adverb. It modifies the verb lives and tells us where. Now, there are no single word adverbs that tell us why. So, let's now move on to adverbial clauses. Here are some very similar examples, but this time we've used an adverbial clause. So he walks like he is late. The text in the yellow is an adverbial clause. It modifies walks and it tells us how. Tony ran when the rain started. When the rain started is an adverbial clause. It modifies ran and tells us when. Sally lives where I was born. Where I was born is an adverbial clause. It modifies lives and tells us where. Now we can do a why one. He won because he trains constantly. Because he trains constantly is an adverbial clause. It modifies won and tells us why. Let's get rid of those arrows. Let's look at the adverbial clauses. Let's go to the top one. In this clause, he is the subject and is the verb. In the next one, the rain is the subject and started is the verb. In the next one, I is the subject and was is the verb. In the next one, he is the subject and trains is the verb. So, if we look back at our definition, an adverbial clause is a group of words that functions as an adverb. Well, we've proved that by comparing the single word adverbs with the adverbial clauses. And contains a subject and a verb. Well, you can see that each of those clauses contains its own subject and verb. So they must be adverbial clauses. Let's get rid of those. There's something else I want to show you in an adverbial clause. Look at these words. These are called subordinating conjunctions. And subordinating conjunctions join the adverbial clause to the main clause. Let's just dive off and talk about subordinating conjunctions for a while. Here's a definition. A subordinating conjunction joins a subordinate clause to a main clause. Okay, here are some examples of subordinating conjunctions. These are the main ones, but there are lots more. And we have a whole lesson dedicated to subordinating conjunctions. But let's put up an example. We will wait here until the rain stops. Until the rain stops is our adverbial clause. There's our subject, there's our verb, and there's our subordinating conjunction. So we know that this is our adverbial clause. It's also a subordinate clause because it's subordinate to the main clause. You will also hear it called a dependent clause. It's a dependent clause because it cannot stand alone as a sentence. Okay, now this is the main clause. You will also hear this called an independent clause. It's an independent clause because it can stand alone as a sentence. We will wait here. That is a perfectly good sentence. And our subordinating conjunction joins our subordinate clause to our main clause. It's the bridge between the two clauses. That's enough about subordinating conjunctions. Let's go back to adverbial clauses. Let's put up another example. Stop running when you hear the whistle. When you hear the whistle is an adverbial clause. It's an adverbial clause that tells us when. This is our main clause. Stop running. That could be a standalone sentence. Now, here's the point I wanted to make. An adverbial clause is not always after the main clause. Sometimes it's before. So look at this. When you hear the whistle, stop running. This time our main clause is at the end. It comes after our adverbial clause. But look at this. We now have a comma separating them. And it's a good practice because it lets the reader know when the adverbial clause has ended, and it shows the reader where the main clause starts. It makes reading much easier. Let's do another example. The spell will last until the clock strikes midnight. Well, there is our adverbial clause. There is our main clause. Let's switch them around. Until the clock strikes midnight, the spell will last. And there is our main clause at the end. And once again, because we've started with the adverbial clause, we've offset it with a comma. I also want to cover this point. The spell will last until midnight. Now look at this, until midnight. That looks a bit like an adverbial clause. It's certainly an adverb. But it's not an adverbial clause because it doesn't contain its own subject and verb. This, in fact, is an adverbial phrase. And this one is after the main clause. And just like before, you can switch them around. And if you do switch them around, remember to add that comma, because it tells the reader where the main clause starts. Okay, I want to leave you with this slide. It's the one we saw at the start. So look at the adverbial clauses. Remember, they all have a subject, they all have a verb, and they all have a subordinating conjunction. And they all function as adverbs because they all describe the verb by telling us how, when, where, or why. Let's just get rid of that bit. I want to show you this writing tip again. Remember, when an adverbial clause or an adverbial phrase or even just an adverb starts a sentence, it is a good writing practice to offset it with a comma to show where the main clause starts. And that is everything I want to cover about adverbial clauses. Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out some of our other videos on grammarmonster.com.